Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. My name is Elisa Sklar, and I'm going to be presenting for you today. We're going to take a look at the 10 musts of economic development data. Now, first of all, just briefly, what I'm going to be looking at is, first of all, what do we know about data, particularly as it regards place marketing? We're going to look at the 10 musts of economic development data, and then I'm going to talk about a kind of checklist that you can use for your particular organization. Let's begin by looking then at some of the specifics about economic development marketing and data. We know from our research over many years that up to 98% of site selectors say that they're using the websites of economic development organizations at some point in their location research. That certainly makes a lot of sense. We know that people are doing their research online. A lot of times, by the time something's printed into a book or some other kind of publication, it quickly becomes obsolete. So it's really important that we use this, we rely on those kind of online sources to provide the data that they're looking for. We also know that site selectors are far more likely to first visit a website for an economic development organization before they even pick up the telephone. And that's really critical because if they're not finding the data that they need in order to advise businesses and investors, then they may just leave your location. You may be losing leads without ever knowing you were actually being considered. And that's really a shame. We want to make sure that doesn't happen. Then, of course, we want to make sure that the data that we put online is critical to what their needs are, what it is that they're actually looking for, what are the things that they need. We're going to talk about what that actually means for them. The other thing that we can talk about, of course, is the idea that if they can't find that information, they're going to take off somewhere else. So it's not just about making sure that it's accessible, but also that it's done in a way that is really kind of useful for them in different kinds of formats. Let's take a look at what that actually means for our purposes here today. So this is a kind of the outline of the 10 ways that we really want to make sure data gets presented. We'll look at them one at a time briefly, and then I'm going to take you through them one at individually to make sure that I can show you some examples about what I mean specifically. Now, first of all, and this may be kind of obvious to many of us, is that data really needs to be accurate and up to date. We really want to make sure that we are giving them sources that are useful and that they can count on it and trust it, that it's current. Next, we want to make sure that we are presenting data that is customized to your location. It isn't enough to just, if you're a community or a metropolitan area or a single county, you don't want to give information that's just for the whole state or a larger region. We really want to make sure that we drill down to the particular location that you're representing. Third, we want to make sure that data is robust. And I'm going to go through what that means. What is the measure of that? That means including all the different kinds of data that site selectors and investors will be interested in seeing. We want to make sure that data is relevant as much as possible so that it's relevant both to their needs, but also to the ways in which they're actually searching, the formats themselves. We want to make sure that the data is interactive and dynamic. And that's because you may be presenting data in a particular kind of way, but a site selector, business, or investor really wants specific questions about, let's say, labor force or consumer spending. And we want to be able to make sure that we're kind of slicing and dicing it in ways that's helpful to them and also intuitive and user-friendly. And that's where the dynamic part of data comes into play. We'll take a look at that also. We want to make sure that the data is granular. So what does granular mean? That means that we present it in different kinds of units, both the really small hyper-local units, right down to the census block group, but also the larger regional units, because that may be important to investors as well. We want to make sure that that data is presented visually. It's really difficult to assimilate or integrate data if it's in long lists of figures and text, but a snapshot of a map or layers, charts, graphs makes it much easier for us to understand complex data and large amounts of data. Number 8, we want to make sure that it is easily exported and shared. And this is important both for your site selectors and potential investors because they want to be able to include it in their long list reports, short list reports, share that information as needed, but also for your own internal needs. You want to make sure that you're able to prepare business cases, prospectus for any particular investor. And so that is really kind of critical as well. 9, we want to make sure that data is easily tracked and analyzed. And that's really important because when we turn on a website or put the data out there, we want to always be monitoring it to see how are people using that, how can we help them find it better, are there particular kinds of searches that are happening, and we want to make sure to be able to respond to that strategically wherever possible. So we'll take a look at what that means. And then number 10, we want to make sure the data is presented in a way that's fully optimized, because we know that a sizable and growing percentage of site selection website users are using mobile devices like smartphones and tablets. And I'm sure some of you have had the experience of trying to navigate a non-optimized website on the small screen of your iPhone or your Android. It's really frustrating. It's very hard to find the link, and you have to be scrolling back and forth to find any of the tabs. People just get frustrated. If they don't have a optimal experience on a website, they're just going to leave. And it really would be a shame to lose leads simply for that kind of fact. So we want to make sure that doesn't happen. So let's take a look at these one at a time. We'll start with the first one. We want to make sure, of course, that our data is accurate and up to date. And that means that we're using really just the most trusted public and private sources in order to present the information, and that it's frequently updated, and that you provide that information at the bottom. So here's an example for one of our Zoom Prospector business reports. You can see what the Info USA report, when was it last updated? Businesses open and close all the time. And so if you aren't presenting really current, fresh business data, then you can't really be regarded as a trusty source. Our business and industry information at Zoom Prospector is updated 4 times annually. Our demographic information updated twice annually. That way we can be sure that we're presenting our users with data that they can actually trust, that's useful. There's nothing worse than making a critical decision based on old data. Next, we want to make sure that the data you are presenting is customized to your location. So that means that, again, this idea that site selectors, they can find suitable warehouses or properties or facilities or vacant land pretty much anywhere. Most communities have something like that, but they're choosing communities first, right? Then they'll go back in and they'll look for the proper facility. So we want to get away from that idea of just looking for specific sites and property databases. It has to be paired with the information about who you are. And they want to be able to find critical data about your region. So here's an example from the Pennsylvania state site. What they're doing at the state is providing information on hundreds, if not thousands, of different kinds of properties all over. It's often a first stop for site selectors or businesses. They then want to be able to drill down to find specific communities. And if you are a single community or metropolitan area, county within the state of Pennsylvania, you want to make sure that you're not competing with every other locality in your state. So the Pittsburgh Regional Alliance website, for example, is then going to provide customized information only for this geographical area. You're now no longer competing with the rest of the state. You're able to provide that information specifically for your area. And it's really a critical way to make sure that you're driving traffic correctly. Similarly, we've got the Butler County CDC website, another location in the state of Pennsylvania. We're making sure that we're providing specific information about that particular area so that we're not always in competition with the rest of the state. This is a particular screenshot from our Size Up local business intelligence tool. So this is a business retention tool. And this is an example of data that's customized to a particular location so that your local businesses can make strategic decisions, especially the small and medium-sized businesses that may not be able to afford expensive analysts or consultants to help them make those kinds of business decisions. So in this case, a shoe store who wanted to get a snapshot and look at some of the other shoe stores in their particular area would be able to, at a glance, look down not just at different kinds of apparel to kind of see what the average consumer expenditures are in that particular area. That's really very clearly customized data that's quite useful. So next we have this concept of robust and comprehensive data. And that means that we're providing all the critical types of data that we know investors and businesses, site selectors are going to be looking for when they come to your particular location. Now, some of this is going to be kind of obvious, right? So we know that demographics is really critical. They're going to be looking for information about population, age, sex, race, income, educational attainment. We want to be able to provide that in text form, as you see in the bottom, but also to visualize it for them. Here's an example for educational attainment. is a chart, and this is a map version of it as well. So this is heat maps showing it at a glance. You can get a sense of what's going on in Bloomington when it comes to those kinds of things. Next, we have labor data. So this is really about types of employees and the businesses in your particular location. And in this case, we've got an example of a labor force report around Davenport, Iowa. We can adjust it, the radius or drive time, as you can see up here, anywhere from 1 to 60 miles or minutes. We're able to provide this kind of labor force data, very detailed data, both in text form and in as a kind of visual image as well. You can look at the different kinds of businesses. And in this case, we go right down to the 6-digit NAICS code, which is really useful because businesses don't tend to think of themselves in general categories. They're not just, for example, an apparel retailer. They may be a children's footwear retailer. And so we want to be able to drill down to specific industries and businesses as much as possible. Similarly, we can look at total employees and kind of play around with that in all sorts of different ways and present that information both visually and in text form at the bottom. Consumer and retail data is really quite useful because we want to show, particularly for the retailers who may be considering locating in your area, detailed consumer expenditure. We can modify radius and drive time. We know, for example, a grocery store is not likely to draw people from 60 miles away unless it's in a particularly remote area. So they're going to be really interested in kind of limiting the drive time, for example, for their particular possible site. So this is really quite useful for them as well. And again, this is a way in which, we see a chart here from Anchorage, Alaska, where you can kind of look both at the 2013 figures, but then also the projections for 2018. So that makes it easier to provide that information for decisions, location decisions. The business and industry data, as I said, goes right down to the 6-digit NAICS level, and it really must be current to be useful. Nothing worse than using old data. You're kind of operating in a vacuum when you're doing that. Businesses can be interactively mapped. So another great example of how providing this information visually really helps us to kind of understand rather than just putting addresses out there or, this way we can understand the kind of spatial relationships between the different businesses and industries. And here's where you can actually drill down by opening up any of the plus and go right down to the bottom. You can get a sense of estimated sales, the number of employees, total businesses in any particular category. And the colors over here will correspond to what we saw in the map over there. That helps us make those decisions. Now, we then might want to get detailed information about specific individual businesses. So clicking on any one of those dots will open some information. We can get specific reports around that business. We can look at where they're located, how many employees, estimated sales. We can actually go right down to the business website as well. And that helps us make, lots of important decisions about what's actually happening in that area, what kinds of industries and businesses are existing there. The geographic data, this may seem like a given when it comes to maps, but of course we're providing information not just about water features and parks and interstates, but other kinds of infrastructure. Sometimes we're providing incentive zones, parks, energy, telecommunications, education, airports, and other kinds of point of interest. An example here from the Miami-Dade Beacon Council website. So in this case, we can actually map educational institutions providing different levels of degrees to their students. This would be quite useful for both industries that are interested in research and proximity to employees of different kinds. So this is really quite detailed data. You can bring it down, of course, even further if you like. This just kind of gives us a bigger picture example of a part of the Miami metro area. Another example from Miami is zoning data. A great example actually of something that you just could not understand if it was presented just in text form, but to actually see how the zones are placed next to each other, to get a snapshot of it, really very quickly begin to understand where we might look for locations for particular kinds of business and industry. Now, this also may seem like a given, but let's think about this here. We want to make sure that your data is presented in ways that are relevant to our users' needs. So we talked about how sites and properties really exist everywhere. We want to make sure that we're presenting this data so that they can choose your location over any other location. really in the United States, in the world sometimes, depending on the business. So we want to make sure that the data is used to tell the story of your location. And this is kind of important, particularly for your marketing and communications team, because this data isn't just there to prepare business cases, and it isn't just there for your website visitors. It's also there for you. So when I work with many of our clients, we talk about picking a business of the day to feature or a property of the day that is available for lease or sale. There's all sorts of ways in which you can take that data and use it to tell a story, profile a specific business, profile a specific property, put it on LinkedIn, put it on your website, blog about it. This data is there for your marketing purposes as well. Now, data that's interactive and dynamic means, again, that we're giving them all this incredible information, but we want to help them use it in ways that are helpful. And when you are an investor or a site selector and you're trying to make decisions, sometimes the format that you initially get the data isn't enough. So we need the analytical tools that are going to help us to kind of make sense of the data. So here's an example of our compare tool. You can compare, in this case, communities. We're looking at a comparison of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Cleveland, Ohio. You can click from labor force, community, to labor force, to demographics, consumer spending. So you really get that kind of comparison at a glance. This is something that can also be exported. It can be shared. It's also possible to compare addresses. So if you have specific businesses or properties that you want to take a look at, you could do a similar kind of comparison around that. So suddenly it becomes possible for the website user to go through your data, to really kind of immerse themselves in it and make decisions. Other analytical tools could be found under the tools folder here. And this is an example of our Polygon tool. So let's say you've had, for a variety of reasons, a specific area that is just relevant to you, that isn't something likely to find on a map. You can draw a polygon that helps you make decisions, maybe respecting county lines or incentive zones or any other kind of features that are of interest to you. Similarly, there is a pinpoint tool to look to a specific location. This is something I want to know more about. Give me information about labor force or consumer spending or demographics around that area. And similarly, we talked about the radius and drive time tools as well, so that you can then begin to customize and work with the data to make it more meaningful to your particular needs. Now, data also needs to be dynamic, and I spend a lot of time on economic development websites. I can tell you that very often when I'm looking for this kind of information, I get sent off the website to a static report somewhere else. I always think, oh no, how could they do this? First of all, they're sending me away from their website to another place, and that's already a problem. But that static report is so useless to me. It's just dry, dull, dead figures. We really want to make it dynamic as much as possible because people are working with data. So here's an example from this is Long Beach, California, and this is an example of how it can kind of be dynamic. If you take a look at all of the green figures here, you can see that if we click on any one of these things, what it's going to do is it's going to change the heat map up on the top. And you can see that that legend over here helps us make sense of those things. Let's see if we can go take a look at the website itself so you can see what this looks like live, because I really do think it's really quite cool. So this is the Gateway Cities Council of Government Property Site Selector page. It's brought us over to Long Beach. Let's just click on one of the properties here. So what we've got here is the ability to look, for more information about that particular property. And as I said, we can then click on any one. Let's click over here on population projections for 2018. Look at that. So it's now filled in for us at a glance, the map up here. We've got the legend over there. And then we were not having to do a lot of scrolling around. Let's say we're just interested in the 40 to 49-year-old category of population. So we can now go back up here. You can see that it's changed it to 40 to 49. Now we can look at the age distribution in a lot more detail, and that would let us actually to go back in there and fill that, and we can drill down, go right down to the property if we wanted to. So that kind of dynamic mapping is really important. There's so many different ways in which we could look for different kinds of categories of people, households, income distribution, for example. and much more. And all of that then just happens right back up here at the top. As you can see, that's changed. So dynamic mapping is really very important for those of us who happen to spend a lot of time on websites. We're looking for this kind of information, and we really want to make sure that it's presented to us in ways that's useful, that we don't have to keep going back and forth to different kinds of reports. So really quite helpful. So granular. Granular is one of those terms that really sounds more complicated than it actually is. What it's actually telling us in this case is that we want to be able to slice and dice our data. So we want to go down right to the small, down to the census block group, right down to the property itself, or up to the entire region. So in this case, we're looking at some information about executives, managers, and administrators around Portland, Oregon. This gives us a heat map of those different kinds of things. And that's kind of more of a kind of larger, big picture look at things. But we want to know a little bit more. We want to go right down to a specific property and get information about the executives, managers, and administrators around that area. And there's all sorts of ways that we can then go through this, as I said, dynamically, take a look at these different things, different occupation categories, and be able to project it both at large scale and small scale to get that kind of information. And as we saw before, you can then modify this 10 miles, in this case, radius around that particular property, and that can all be modified according to miles or drive time from 1 to 60, so that you can really go, right down to that particular area or bring it back up again. Really useful for making business decisions. Another example of hyperlocal here, this is on the Texas site search site. You can see we're looking at a specific property. We want to get a look at it from a satellite perspective. Maybe we're interested in parking. Maybe we want to think about how trucks can access the particular location. We can, go right down to Street View to be able to see what it looks like in that particular area. We can then use the business tab to be able to do research right down to the 6-digit NAICS code. And again, this is all modifiable. In this case, we're looking at a 1 mile radius around that particular property. And you could take it much bigger if you wanted to by opening the report criteria and going, right up to 60 if you wanted to, and that lets you kind of get a bigger picture. So I've given you a lot of different examples at this point of ways in which we can present data visually and how that's so useful because, as we said, it's really difficult to absorb long lists of data and figures. And so we want to be able to tell our story visually. So some of the other examples, one is our new charts and graphs feature, really quite beautiful and also easily exported in different formats so that you could put them in reports if you want to, kind of professional, polished looking reports. On our Size Up local business intelligence tools, another example of using data visually that I always found quite wonderful. This is, as I said, a business retention tool, right? So you may often hear from your local businesses, you're so interested in attracting investment and creating new jobs. What about the businesses that are already here? And often our smaller and medium-sized businesses have to make critical decisions without access to data because they can't afford the market research or the consultants who can help them do that. And the nice thing, of course, about a tool like this is it presents data visually because we can't count on all of our small business owners to be able to kind of make sense of, the kind of big data picture. So an example would be for a shoe store in the Oklahoma City region. If you put in your revenue, you can get a quick look at this gauge over here to see how do you compare to others. You could open this tab if you wanted to. When did you start? How much are you paying your employees? Again, all of this opens up into more detail. And here it's kind of benchmarking you. So you can see the business based on the data I put in there compared to other businesses in Oklahoma, Oklahoma City, the state of Oklahoma, and the entire country. So really visually able to, at a glance, help businesses make those kinds of decisions. As I said, you could open any of the tabs. So here you can see by revenue how this particular business, which I have made up, I'm just pulled that number out, but you can see how that might compare to other shoe stores, both in the county, in the city, in the state, and in the country. Very useful for local businesses. There's many things I can do with this tool. Actually, another example of visual ways that data are useful is if you wanted to map out your competition. Let's say you're a shoe and footwear store in Oklahoma City, you want to see where the other shoe and footwear stores are because you're maybe interested in making a location decision, or you're thinking about moving or thinking about expanding. This brings you right down to the individual businesses, maps them out for you, and also gives you their addresses. So really using that kind of visual method is really quite helpful. Next, we know that data that is easily exported and shared. This is something site selectors tell us all the time. They need to be able to use the data that you're giving them, and they need to be able to do that quite easily. So we want to make their job as easy as possible. So there's multiple ways in which you can export data. For example, in this particular labor force reports, you could export it as a PDF. In this case, you can click on the share link, you can link back to the reports, you can email it. There's all sorts of social sharing options that are possible right there to make sure that you can get the word out as easily as possible. This is an example of a property report, and I've given you a kind of a big image here so you can see that if you wanted to print out the property report, people could access it with the QR code at the bottom. That's another way they might be able to do that. And there's also some social sharing links at the very bottom that you can use if you wanted to share a specific report. That is possible as well. Demographics also, this is on the Size Up LBI tool. You can see that it's possible to export and share the reports. This is something we were hearing from business owners, that they have done all this research on the tool and now they want to use it to prepare a business case, but to go to the bank or to investors or to make a case for some different kind of proposal of theirs, but also maybe for archiving purposes. It lets them kind of access data that they would never otherwise have had access to because it's just too expensive for small businesses. So really a wonderful thing for you to be able to offer your local small businesses. Next, we know that we want to make sure data is easily tracked and analyzed. And I am always astonished when I work with economic developers how many of them have these lovely websites and online site selection tools, but how few of them are spending the time to go through their Google Analytics data to monitor where is your traffic coming from? What organic search terms are people using to find you? How are you calculating the return on time you might be spending on social sharing or blogging? I was working with one economic development agency and I looked through their Google Analytics and mentioned that they had a high number of visitors from Germany. And they were very pleased because they had done a trade mission to Germany, but they themselves had not spent the time on the Google Analytics to calculate whether that trade mission was worthwhile. It looked like it was because now there were a lot of Germans who were accessing their site selection website. So that really is quite useful. You can get all sorts of information. I do have another entire webinar on making sense of Google Analytics in economic development, but here is one quick snapshot. You can see that in this case, for example, the social visitors is a much smaller percentage than organic search visitors, but it's interesting to note that the ones who are coming in from social are actually spending a little bit more time on the site, and that's because they're maybe more motivated users. They already understood what they were going on to see, so that maybe even though it's a smaller proportion of people visiting, they may in fact, if you spend time in your analytics, find them to be more valuable site visitors. And so that's a place you would want to put more time into your social sharing and your social information. Now, our Zoom Prospector Analytics works as a separate kind of analytics site that we give our clients. It works alongside Google Analytics, but it lets you get a lot more information about the kinds of economic development searches that people are doing on your site. So are they looking for sites, for buildings, etc., all sorts of information that, might be of interest to you. You might find that suddenly you're getting a high proportion of people looking for call centers or vacant land of a certain size. That's really useful information to know because your marketing should respond to that. So those kinds of analytics help us learn what demand exists. That helps us identify potential new markets, prospects. We can use blogs and marketing more strategically once we know it there. So this is our 10th essential component. So I say that this is looking at making data fully optimized for mobile websites. And this is important. As I said, our research shows that as much as 1/4 of website visitors on site selection websites are using smartphones or tablets. And if your site isn't fully optimized, then you may be losing leads without ever knowing it. We've all had the experience of trying to navigate a non-optimized website using the little screen of our phone. It's very, very frustrating. And what do? We click away most of the time because it's just too frustrating. We want to make sure that doesn't happen. So our Zoom Prospector site has now fully optimized for mobile. That means that you've got all of the functionality, but it's made for a small screen so that you don't need to look for, hunting and pecking for those little links. Everything is easy to swipe. It's all really makes sense on a smartphone. You can quickly and easily navigate through all of the same functionality that you were able to in other places. Now, I said there were 10 essential components to economic development data, but I wanted to add a bonus one, and that is to make sure that your data is easy to find. This really seems like a no-brainer, right? Except that I can tell you that I spend hours and hours on economic development websites, and often it is a scavenger hunt. I am looking for the contact us page. I sometimes don't even know where that community is located. Not everybody knows where Springfield is. I think that's the most popular place name in the US, if I'm not mistaken. So you need to make sure that if you've got a visitor coming from elsewhere in the country or elsewhere in the world, they may not immediately know where you are. You need to make sure that all that data is easy to find. One of my favorite examples for a clean, well-developed website is Choose New Jersey. I'm particularly pleased with the way they've used this graphic to make sure that if you're looking to find properties and data about New Jersey, it's very clear right from the beginning, above the fold, where you go to do that. Another example of making sure data is easy to find is on the Skagit County website. This is a county in Washington, and they're using our search widget. These search widgets can be used for buildings, sites, or communities. A little drop-down menu here. It's a little box. You could put it on as many of your website pages as you want to. They put in the basic information right from the top, and that way they're able to go straight through to the results page. You're making sure that that data is instantly and easily accessible right from the beginning, no matter where they are on your website. It sounds really obvious, but this is a mistake that I see made over and over again. If your data is buried 4, 5, 6, or even 7 clicks down into your website, it's not going to be found. You want to make sure they can access it. So these are the 10 essential components. I don't have the +1 up here, but you get a sense of what those are. I am going to be sending all of you, along with a link to this webinar, I will send you a checklist so you can go through that. I'm very happy to work individually with anyone to answer questions. If there's anything that you want, and particularly as it regards your own website, I'm happy to do that. You can reach me easily either on Twitter. This is my email address. Very happy to take any questions. If people have any, feel free to put them in the questions bar over there on the right-hand side, and I can make sure that that we get that answered for you. Any questions? I have one question here about our sources of data. So we've got a variety of different places that we get our data from at Zoom Prospector. All of them are, well respected, really the gold standard in data when it comes to those kinds of things. I can give you a little bit more information one-on-one if you would like to get in touch with me. I could say that our business data comes from Infomart. As you've seen, a lot of it is census data, Bureau of Labor Statistics, a lot of the kind of really well-regarded, recognized sources, both public and private. We do work in Canada as well. It's another question that I'm getting. We've produced bilingual sites in Canada, French and English, some of them just English. And we use Environics data up in Canada, which is also recognized as the gold standard in data. Okay, I see that this brings us to the end of our session. I am very happy to keep in touch with you. Please feel free to get in touch if you have any specific questions or if you'd like me to take a look at your website and help you problem solve stuff. Otherwise, we will be in touch. Thank you for joining us and have a wonderful day.